Yes, welcome on in, everybody, to the Saturday Night Network for another edition of our countdown of SNL's greatest cast members of all time, as voted by you. My name is John Schneider from the SNN. Very pumped to be back with you on this Thursday night to reveal three more names on the list. 18, 17, and 16 are coming off the board tonight, which means we are getting into some of the absolute greats that have ever walked the stage in Studio 8H. And I'm so excited to reveal them tonight and talk about some real legends of the show with two legends on the podcast with me tonight. And first up, let me bring in Victoria Franzo. Victoria, how are you?
I am feeling great. This is my first countdown with you, and I'm excited to talk through some of these, I think, phenomenal choices for tonight.
Yes, very, very pumped to get into it. Victoria, it was great to be with you on By the Numbers last night, and looking forward to doing back-to-back nights with you. And then joining us as well is one of our fantastic patrons, and that would be Will Norman on the show tonight. So, Will, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thanks, John. It's great to be here. I'm really excited to join. I'm really happy and excited to talk about all the characters or the cast members we have to talk about today. We've got some really good people to discuss, and I'm really excited to get into it and hear your guys' thoughts too on what you think with how this all shook out so far.
Absolutely. Well, since you are both joining us for the first time on this countdown, let me ask you both what you think of when you are determining the criteria for the greatest cast members of all time. What are you thinking about, Victoria? Because you have so much experience with, the sketch comedy stage. That for you, do you look at the show in a certain way where you're evaluating one cast member versus another?
I mean, one, it's tough to rank your top 50, especially with as many legends as there are in this cast. But when I'm thinking about my top 50, I'm thinking of who would do a good job of bringing non-viewers to the show. Or, when you think of SNL, who do you think of? And, who's really made that impact on the show? Whether it's one character that can, leave a lasting impression for a very long time, or just taking a look at maybe some of our underrated folks too. So it's a mix of things, but really I look for who's made a big impact with it could be with just one character.
Will, what about you? What do you think of when you are determining who the greatest cast members of all time are?
John, I think about a lot of different things. I think, like, I'm sure I'm not alone in this as a fan. When I look at SNL, really kind of approach it almost like a sports team, just like a franchise that I root for forever, right? And I'm kind of looking to round out that roster with all the things that you need to make the show successful. So I'm looking at someone who can do characters, someone who might be able to contribute to writing, someone who can do impressions, someone who can play a lead or support role. Someone who can be you when they walk on, it's their sketch, you feel good having it in their hands. But then if they just show up for 5 seconds, you feel like they're going to give it their all too. And then I think it's kind of an unspoken thing, but just that person being a good teammate behind the scenes, like as a cast member, like what kinds of things do the other cast members say about that person? Do they want to work with that person? Do writers want to write for that person? Like, do they play well with others? All those things together are some people are stronger in different areas, but I'm looking at all those things to really feel who I think are the best for me, because it's all really subjective, right? But those are the things I'm looking at when I'm trying to figure out what makes the most sense for me and the best cast members.
Makes sense. I love all those criteria. And I think that, especially, Victoria, you mentioned people who may not be so into the show, and then who would you show to them? That is a factor here. That's when we talk about legacy here. And Will, I love everything you're saying as well. I think these are all criteria we have to look at when we are evaluating, especially as we get into these top 18 that we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks. How do you parse through the best of the best? We will talk through that over the next few shows, including tonight. So we'll kick things off by talking about the list so far. We're going to bring up on screen 50 through 19 so far, the first 32 cast members we have revealed. So again, spoilers, if you have not gone back and watched, this is your chance to get out of here. But here we go. 3, 2, 1. I will bring up on screen the first 32 cast members we have revealed so far, and I will read out the list for all of you, starting with Kevin Nealon at 50, Joe Piscopo. There you go. Joe Piscopo, David Spade, Mikey Day, Tracy Morgan, Chevy Chase, Jimmy Fallon, Bowen Yang, Martin Short, and Sherry O'Terry. Up to 40 with Ego Wodem, Taron Killam, Chris Parnell, John Lovitz, Beck Bennett, Jane Curtin, Seth Meyers, Daryl Hammond, Anna Gasteyer, and Bobby Moynihan. 30 down to 21 is Tim Meadows, Vanessa Bayer, Bill Murray, Rachel Dratch, Adam Sandler, Jan Hooks, Adie Bryant, John Belushi, Molly Shannon, and Andy Samberg. And last week, in addition to Andy, we have also revealed Norm Macdonald and Mike Myers at 20 and 19 as we get up into the teens in this countdown. So, Victoria, what are your thoughts on how the listeners have done so far?
I think they're on par. Again, it's really hard. This is really tough to do. It's no easy feat to put together a top 50 out of all the incredible folks that have been on the show. That being said, however, I don't know that I would have put Belushi down low, quote, at 23, or nor Adam Sandler. I think they would have been higher on my list there. But other than that, I think the rest of it tracks. But it just depends. I mean, man, from my standpoint, this would look a little different, but it makes sense for if you're looking at it from a general holistic overview.
Yeah, we had so many people voting on this list, so it really takes into account everyone's opinion here. But
Yep.
I do agree. I think Belushi was consensus pretty low. I have him higher on my list, and I'll reveal my rankings once we get through the next 3 reveals coming up. But Will, what do you think of the cast rankings so far?
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with what both you and Victoria have already said in terms of someone like Belushi obviously being that low. I think that comes as a surprise. I was most surprised and excited for some of the love the current cast members got in terms of getting into the top 50, just because a lot of times when I'm looking at top 50, I kind of lean towards people whose total career has kind of come and ended to get a feel for the whole picture for their career and the show. Um, but when I'm looking at this list overall, I think as we've gone through, because as we talked about before, it's so subjective. A lot of people that are on here are people that I chose as well for my top 50. So it's kind of just a win and exciting to have them be on the list and feel like, oh, like someone like I'll shout like a Chris Parnell, someone who I've always really liked, is one of my favorite cast members, and you're like, did he ring the same way with other people? Like, do people respect his work that he did on the show the same way that I did, or the way that the things that I liked? And it's just whether people feel he's too high or too low, like it's just exciting to see him on the list. So I kind of just take people that I have in my top 50 that made it as just a win overall.
Agreed. Victoria, any other thoughts, or should we start with the first reveal of the night?
I do want to give shout out to who I think are completely underrated. I'm just glad they made it on this list, and those are Anna Gasteyer and Sherry O'Terry. I think they're often forgotten about when you think of iconic women of SNL. So I'm really happy to see both of them on this list too.
Yeah, definitely appreciate that. Okay, we have 3 reveals to do tonight, 18, 17, and 16. I'm going to put this out there. 3 of my favorite cast members in SNL history are coming off the board tonight, and it is so exciting to get to talk to them. Are they too high? Are they too low? Or are they just right? Well, we'll start with number 18 here on the list. And this is somebody I am incredibly excited to talk about, who brought a unique energy to the show unlike anybody else in its history. And here at number 18 is the one, the only, my man, Will Forte, here at number 18. 8 seasons on Saturday Night Live from 2002 to 2010. 155 episodes of the show, good for 18th all time. 554 sketches, 22nd all time. And yeah, Forte, just incredible. This is my favorite cast member of all time. If I was making my favorite list, nobody spoke to my sense of humor in the way that Will Forte does. He has made me laugh. He has a hit rate of making me laugh pretty much at 100%. The guy brought a unique energy to the show, like I said, that I really haven't seen in another cast member. Everyone has always looked for the next Will Forte. There was no one like him before. I think there's been no one like him since. And that's why he's so fascinating. Did he dominate on the show in the way that some people ahead of him on this list did? Maybe not, but he certainly carved out a place in the show that was the Will Forte spot on the show. And that's why I think there are so many impressive things to talk about. And we'll get into some of the metrics and the moments that we love from Will Forte. But first, Victoria, what are your thoughts on Will Forte here at number 18?
I think he's placed just right, at least for me. I know he's your favorite, and really it was because you mentioned it to me a while ago that I started watching him a little bit more. I don't think at the time he was on this show, I appreciated him and his talent as much as I should have. Uh, you know, but as I look back, I'm like, wow, that actually really is funny. But when I think of SNL from when I really started watching it regularly, he was a staple, and I think it continues to be a staple on the show. I think he makes for a he's right where he needs to be on this list. I will also admit, John, don't be disappointed in me. I did not really like MacGruber when I first saw it, but I've rewatched it since. I'm like, this is so funny. And what was wrong with me back
Like the
then? I
movie
just
or the sketches on the show?
the sketches, I really didn't think they were that funny. I was like, oh, I don't get it. But now I'm like, this is ridiculous in all the best ways. And you know, if I could go back and talk to younger Victoria, I'd tell her to get a grip.
Yeah. I mean, he is like, if you ever meet Will Forte, he is one of the nicest people in the entire world. And the fact that he can just like get into character and think of zany ways to do things on the show, is just like comes from this dark place that I absolutely love, that he's willing to push those boundaries. So I can understand, Victoria, where you're coming from, which is like, if you're not buying into Will Forte, it may take you a second, but once you're on board, it's like, all right, he's on screen. I don't know what I'm going to get, and it's going to be fantastic. So from one Will to another Will, what do you think about Will Forte here at number 18?
Yeah, I think I'll be honest, I think that he came in a little higher than I just expected, like overall rankings. Like I just because of I think he is a so talented on the show. He did so much good work. But I do, to your point, John, it's such a specific type of humor. And I think that way that it's maybe not, in the variety show way, like general for everyone, but there's when he hits, it's so good. He knocks it out of the park, and he's also a great teammate with other people on the show. I do enjoy, and it's always nice when cast members can have things like a MacGruber where it might be formulaic. You know what's coming, you know what to expect, but it's the different ways that they play with it and the different ways that they get to that punchline and get to that ending are always fun to see. And I think, to Victoria's point, when you're watching the show week after week and you're a fan, you're like, okay, it's MacGruber, I know what to expect. Like you can kind of take those for granted and be like, all right, I know what's going to happen. But rewatching some of his like best sketches, and then looking at all the things I talked about before, he brought all those things to the table. And so once again, I think that he should be up in the upper part of the rankings. I think if anything, it's just some of his specific idiosyncrasies that might have made him land this way. But I do think that he is obviously one of the best to do it, and I think that he definitely deserves to be on this list. And I'm excited to see him. It's like as we get to this top part of the show, or the top part of the rankings, kind of separated the cream from the cream. You're like, all right, when is such and such coming in? When is this person coming in? So it's good to see Will Forte pop on the list for sure.
Yeah, I think like when you are going back to that great, great cast and you're talking about people who were in that cast, most people probably wouldn't mention Will Forte right away. I mean, people will say Bill Hader and Kristen Wiig and Jason Sudeikis and Fred Armisen, but when are they going to get to Will Forte? Like Andy Samberg probably comes up before Will Forte, and then. But when you're watching the episodes, like there's nothing like it when Will Forte pops up on screen. It's so unique to the rest of the show. And just going back to, one of the first things I ever watched on Saturday Night Live, like live in person, was, or at least through the TV screen, was Tim Calhoun that he did on Weekend Update, which was his imitation of a presidential candidate that was just like so neurotic and, his ability to create that character on screen was so funny to me because it's so different from who Will Forte was and everything else. And, that, and then, the spelling bee sketch to me is like one of those all-time sketches where he just goes on and on and on and on. To my favorite, I'll just name a couple more and then I'll hand out the rest to you. My two of my favorite sketches in SNL history on my personal list are the locker room motivation with Peyton Manning, where he does that coach, the dancing coach.
Yes.
To me, yeah, just like there's nothing like it on the show. I think it is my favorite sketch of all time. And if I had to pick one sketch in SNL history to show anybody, to your point, Victoria, who hasn't watched the show, I would show them the Jeff Montgomery sex offender sketch, because
there it is.
That to me is like so smart and so funny. So like we could go on and on here. Let's go through some of those moments. Victoria, for you, either talking about the ones I named or some other ones, what are some of your favorite Will Forte moments?
Well, I think fun fact for you, Will Forte has said that the motivational locker room one with Peyton Manning was one of the like his favorite that he's ever done on this show. So you and him are in sync. Bros for sure. I think my favorite, it's so dumb and it's maybe like 3 minutes too long of a sketch, but Potato Chip with Jason Sudeikis and Blake Lively, just so oddball. Like and he's known for his like 10-to-1 sketches, and he's known to be this weirdo. And I think that I really appreciate that about him. And as a fellow weirdo, it's great to see someone else's thoughts, like, you know what I mean? Not thoughts, but their thought process, I should say, up on that screen. But yeah, potato chip for sure. How many chips did I have in there? I put in 34 chips. Uh, who ate that chip? Yeah. So it's just so dumb, but so funny. I love it.
Will, what about you? What are some of your favorite Forte moments?
I will double down on what both of you said. I have to reiterate Trick or Treat with Jeff Montgomery sex offender sketch, hilarious, like such a smart sketch, and like that's what I mean, like the use of that kind of off kilter energy that he has, like just the weirdness of it. I think it's just like such a well done sketch. One that I'll throw in there too, that this is like kind of well off the beaten path, but like the Falconer overall, obviously like that sketch. But I gotta say, one of my favorite sketches of the Falconer, and it's not really just Forte, but it is the time travel one of the Falconer, where essentially you have this is Kevin Spacey, but that aside, he goes back in time over and over again, and it involves the whole cast, and it builds and it builds and it builds. And I just love that sketch. I think it was like a season finale episode and involves the whole cast. But like, I think it speaks to Forte's ability to want to have like a signature character that he's like willing to share with the rest of the cast. Like, I don't think there's many people in the history of the show would say like, this is my character. I'm going to have the entire cast get in on this and like make this a big production. And something that was obviously like one of his signature characters. And so that's just one of my like deep cut sketches that I do like. If you're talking about showing people like what the show is like when they utilize like full cast ones. I know full cast pieces aren't everyone's like, favorite thing, but I just really like the way it speaks to his ability to play well with others, with one of his favorite, one of his more well-known characters.
Yeah, I'll mention a few others that really speak to me. And like this is my guy, by the way, so I got to go on as long as I want about Will Ford.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you cook, John. Go for it.
All right, let's do it. All right, give me Clancy T. Blacklorat, which he brought back when he hosted his weird hosting. I mean, Will Forte had the weirdest appearance as an alumni host, and like, isn't that just perfection for one of the weirdest cast members in SNL history, that his episode was so odd? But yes, he brought back Clancy T. Blacklorat, which is actually like just so funny to me. And the energy that he brings to that, where he's singing and going absolutely crazy to the point where he's red in the face, is almost as good as his Zell Miller impression, where he is absolutely out of breath, could pass out on stage at any moment that he's yelling so hard. That is fantastic. You have to go look that up from Hardball. And he just does so many times. It was so great. And a personal favorite of mine as well, the ESPN guys, where we got Pete Twinkle and Greg Stink. I know that's a Jason and Will thing, but even like, that combo together, I think is one of the better combos in SNL history. If you're talking about duos, I think the Superfans once did a duo episode here, but like between Bon Jovi and, the ESPN guys, I mean, those are some great sketches. And like, one of the things I think about from a legacy perspective is just like, if I could go back, and I think if Will could go back too, he would say this: I just wish he wouldn't have left at the end of season 35. If he could have just done like 1 or 2 more years, like, holy shit, those seasons 36, 37 would have been so good. And I think he's really the missing ingredient from some of those seasons. All right, any of you got any others?
I'm giggling because I'm thinking of the ESPN one where Jason Sudeikis is like vaginal cream.
I was thinking the Maxi Pads one.
Yeah.
From
yeah,
the women's golf one. Yeah, and those are like, and it's a great use of Forte too, because like I know you said it's like a Sudeikis one, but like with Forte being so aloof and just so literal with everything, like just makes that sketch to take it to like another level, which I think is just one of the many things he was really good at on the show.
Yeah, and those
Definitely.
two are a great pair. Him and
Yeah.
I mean, like between that one, Potato Chip, and a few others, I mean, it's the two of them. So bros.
Definitely agree. Look, so from my criteria, was Will Forte made for SNL? I mean, I feel like the guy was birthed into Studio 8H. Like he was absolutely bred to be on this show. From an analytics perspective, 3.49 SPE, so 3.5 sketches per episode. I mean, that's his average. I mean, I'm enjoying the 3.5 episode sketches per episode mark. Like that's pretty good. 43rd all time. Very solid for Will. And I knew that those 3.5 sketches, on average, were going to be some great stuff. From a sketch perspective per season 28 11, season 28 season 29 9th place, 30 he was in 8th place, 31 6th, 32 9th, and then he started to rise. He really peaked season 33 in 5th, season 34 tied for 3rd, and season 35 tied for 6th. So he never dominated sketches, but that wasn't Will Forte's thing, right? Like, I mean, he's so specific and so weird, you almost can't expect him to take over the show in the way that, like, let's say Kristen Wiig took over the show, or Bill Hader took over the show at times, or Fred. Like, it's just, you got what you got from Will, and what you got was so fantastic in smaller doses than those guys. So I think that's one of those things to factor into when you're thinking about analytics for me here. And as far as legacy is concerned, I think his legacy is like very, very high within, the fan community who watches SNL and fell in love with the show. Does the general audience think of Will Forte as a high legacy guy when it comes to SNL history? I have to be real and say I don't think so. I think he is lost a little bit to the general audience, and that is why he may have come here at 18 and not necessarily higher on the list for some people. Did his hosting stint help in season 47 as much as I loved seeing him back? I don't think it did. I think if we would have had this like fantastic hosting appearance, that probably boosts the legacy there. So I do have to dock him there if I'm going to pick a place and be objective about this. Like I said, personally, my favorite cast member of all time. I love seeing him on the show, but Victoria and Will, I want to know from you, is he too high, too low, or just right on the list for you? So Victoria, starting with you.
Oh man. I mean, I was gonna say too, when I say impact, that's what I mean. He's an excellent example of that, where he doesn't have to take over to leave a lasting impression, whether for better or for worse. So he really embodies that for me. I think he's just right, and especially I think that's a little bias, given my age and when I started watching the show regularly and my kind of humor and what I enjoy. But for me, he's placed where he should be.
Will, what do you think?
Yeah, I think he's a higher than I expected him to be, but I think he's just about right. 'Cause I think he should be in that upper part of the ranking as well. I think to your point, for better or worse, he was someone that really committed to every sketch that he was in and didn't do a lot of things to bring attention to himself other than just giving his all to the sketch. Like, didn't break a lot, like was always committed to it. Like, I think that those things sometimes might take away from, going viral or being like someone outside the show. But when he shows up for a sketch, like he's going to bring it. And I think that real fans like really respect his work. And I think that he's obviously a great cast member. So happy to see him on the list.
Yeah, I think he's just right to potentially a little high on the list. And I know this is sacrilegious to all of our Will Forte fans in the chat. And I'm the biggest one, right? Like, I'll lead the fan club for Will Forte, where if I'm building an SNL cast, I want Will Forte in that cast, no doubt. But I'm just saying, as far as like contributions to the entirety of Saturday Night Live, I do believe that there are probably 20 people I could name that maybe had more of an impact on the overall show. Though Will's impact was so unique, I can understand the argument there. So I think I'm still processing how to properly place him without being subjective about it. But I'm just so thrilled that we got to talk about Will Forte and that he made it up this far, because he's the guy. I can't wait to have him on the podcast one day. I really hope we can get to do that show, because I'll be gushing for a while.
That's my dream for you, John.
Thank you. I appreciate you, Victoria.
My
all right.
prayer
Well,
for
let me just say, Rolling Stone had Will Forte in 2015 at number 52. So way too low on Rolling Stone's list back in the day. Rolling Stone said he was taken for granted and his sketches came from a dark and special place. But if he really felt that way, Rolling Stone, you would have put him up higher. So way too low there on that list. We have him much higher. Okay. There you go. Will Forte at number 18. Let's get to number 17 on the list. I think this is going to be a very interesting person to talk about here. This is somebody I'll just throw it out there. I think this person is way too low on the list here, and you'll see if you agree with me. But this is one of the original archetypes of somebody who has been on Saturday Night Live. And when you're thinking of all-time greats of the show, this person has to cross your mind. And 4 seasons on Saturday Night Live, the one, the only, Dan Aykroyd here at number 17, the other half of the Blues Brothers we get here. We got Belushi a couple weeks ago. Now we get Aykroyd here, 1975 to 1979. Did Weekend Update as well for one season, 86 episodes on the show, 470 sketches, 34th all time. And man, there's nobody like Dan Aykroyd. I see the chat's going crazy right now.
Yep.
And I'm with you, chat. I am totally with you 100%. What were the listeners thinking here? Dan Aykroyd, to me, is in the pantheon of greatest cast members of all time. And had so many great moments. Like I said, built an archetype that I feel like there are so many cast members that you can follow down through chronological SNL history and be like, that is the Dan Aykroyd in this cast. And his ability to, his character work and his ability to even not just do characters, but also, straighten out a sketch and anchor it was so fantastic. I can't imagine what those first few seasons look like without a Dan Aykroyd in it. So for me, this is a fantastic person to celebrate on the show. Too low here for me here at 17. But Victoria, what are your thoughts on Dan Aykroyd?
Absolutely agree. He created the blueprint for us sketch and improv comics and, created the path to SNL and to beyond that. Though I will say the first time I even heard of Dan Aykroyd was not through SNL. I watched his film Trading Places with Eddie Murphy, a fellow SNL cast member, and that was my introduction to him. So the bar was incredibly high. It's a very funny movie. I don't think a lot of it would hold up today in 2023. So just watch it through the lens of that era. With that being said, he's timeless, and 17's too low. Needs to be way higher. I'm so sorry to say, but he's also a Second City boy, and I just really appreciate what he's done for the show. If we want to do 50 best all time or whatever, greatest of all time, it should be the quote, not ready for primetime players, because without them, we wouldn't be here talking about it. People wouldn't be upset in the chat. So, put some respect on Dan Aykroyd's name from my end. We need to see him. I would put him top 10. So.
Yeah, me too, for sure. Will, if you go back and you watch those first few seasons, like when I first went back and I watched the 70s, I didn't know a lot about the show, and I was watching it and I knew like, okay, John Belushi is going to be a big deal. Like I've heard about this guy my whole life. Chevy Chase is going to be a big deal. But, when you go back and you watch that, you're like, to me, like Dan Aykroyd was my guy. It wasn't a Chevy or John thing. It was a Danny thing. Like he was my guy because I just think that he elevated like every single sketch that he was in a way that I think maybe those other two didn't always do. What do you think of Dan Aykroyd here at 17?
I totally agree with both of you. I expected him to be in the top 10 for sure. Whether people are familiar with his work early parts of the show or not, just the respect as being the blueprint for a lot of what's to come later. I think there's a lot of people that come after. To your point, John, like watching the things he was able to do on the show that, when rewatching some of his sketches, I'm like, oh yeah, this is, iterative of this other type of sketch, or this is the type of style that this other cast member later, replicated in. I think that sometimes the originals don't get enough credit. But I just think that he was so good. And in watching sketches where even classic sketches where it's like, I know I've seen a part of this clip, or I've seen him say, Jane, you ignorant slut, hundreds of times, but I'm going to go back and watch like him monologuing, or him in the Coneheads, or, him as President Carter. And it's like, these things still hold up. His delivery is great. He's versatile. And I just thought that, when I saw that he was here, it was just kind of like, how is he this low, and, like I said, once again, I talked about the top for the most part, it's like, all right, someone made it. I'm happy that they're on the list, that's great. But there's a few that pop up as we talked about that you're like, this is way too low. And it sucks when some people, the originals, don't get the respect that they deserve. And I think this is a good example of that. We talked about Belushi already, but this is another great example of like watch the tape.
Agreed.
Yeah. I mean, like, look, Will, I know you're a big basketball guy. This to me, like, not respecting John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd on the show is the equivalent of not respecting Bill Russell and Will Chamberlain. Like, it's like, you can talk about
Yeah.
Michael Jordan, you can talk about LeBron all you want, but like, these are the people who helped carve out the show. And again, like 17 is a
100%.
high placement on the list, but like, again, I think he has to be squarely in the top 10. I think that him, if you go back and you watch a lot of every original cast member has their own place as far as importance is concerned. But I think if somebody was like, gun to my head was like, okay, who are the most important people that you could not take away from the start of Saturday Night Live to make the show what it was? I really think I would probably say Dan and Gilda. Like, I think they were just so important in, making the general quality of the show just improve. They had abilities that I think, like, were not one note at all. Like, they could do so much at the show. And, as far as characters are concerned, I mean, let's talk about some of these moments that we're praising. Like, perhaps some of you listeners out there have not gone back and not watched these seasons and are like, well, why does he deserve to be in the top 10? I mean, let's talk about some of these moments, including Super Bass-o-matic 76, which, he did again at SNL 40. I mean, that is, Dan Aykroyd, direct to camera as a pitchman, and his ability to, talk really quickly, but do it in a way that you understand it and it's funny, is something that he, basically created and then people have been trying to do for so long. So there's those moments. He could also go from, super, well put together to extremely sleazy. And he played sleazy in maybe a likable way, which is really, really hard to do when you go back and you think about his Erwin Mainway character that he did, the guy who, produced horrible, horrible toys for children. So
Yes.
those are just a couple early examples. But between them and, being able to play President Carter, and then, in, to me, two of the most important character groups in SNL history, the Coneheads and the Wild and Crazy Guys. It's just, his resume is endless to me. So, Will, I will start with you here. Are there any moments to you that you're like, oh, we got to talk about this one?
Yeah, I mean, you're going off that laundry list of sketches and moments, and it's like, I would just reiterate again, like 4 seasons. Like there's so often we talk about the people that have great careers and they get double that time, or sometimes 5 times that time to accumulate the kinds of moments and things that he's done, like over 40 years ago, and in fact they'll still resonate today. I think is really cool. But going into some ones you just mentioned in terms of sketches, the French Chef with Julia Childs, I think that one is just like a really fun one. I think it's that we're talking iterations of that with the doing a kind of having fun with the sketch and then having things go wrong with the physical comedy and like the fake blood going everywhere. Like we've seen versions of that so many times for the show, but to have that concept hit like originally, like in those early years, is really fun rewatch. I did enjoy the consumer probe with Erwin Mainway. You talked about the dangerous toys, just the way that he's kind of just being just like kind of sleazy and kind of like underhanded and kind of not going full tilt with being a fast talker, but just kind of being like, oh, like, don't worry about this, and just kind of having that very slick way of talking. I thought those are two really fun sketches. And then the Coneheads Family Feud with I think Bill Murray as the game show host, kind of talking against the where they're going through and doing their Coneheads thing, and that was a real those are three that stuck out to me, like it just being really fun rewatches where it still holds up. It's still a really fun rewatch, and seeing him kind of do his thing in three very different ways.
Victoria, what are some other moments to you that you would like to talk about?
Oh man. Really, I had underlined all caps was the French Chef as Julia Child, and we
So
covered
great.
that. But I think again, he set the tone. He is the blueprint. He is the original for everything that we've seen on that show. There, as Will just mentioned, there have been iterations and other like similar concepts to that Julia Child, uh, the French Chef sketch, and the physicality and the fake blood. And my favorite part is, "I'm going to sleep now. Good night." That was a really horrible impression of him. as Julia Child. Sorry for the disrespect to both of those people. But I mean, yeah, I really don't have much to say. I think it's just even if you haven't seen him on Saturday Night Live, his movies and everything he's done since then are just so impactful. It's just I'm really trying to wrap my head around how he doesn't make top 10 or how he wasn't an obvious choice, but we'll
Yeah. Well, I mean,
say
look,
la vie, as the French say.
speaking of movies, I mean, Blues Brothers, right? I mean, these
Yes.
were like, the Blues
Yeah.
Brothers, now we have Jim Belushi with Danny, but, back then John with Danny. They
Mhm.
were, basically this was created out of Saturday Night Live. We get what is, arguably the greatest episode in SNL history, the Steve Martin Blues Brothers episode, where Danny and John are the musical guests at the show, which is something like, except for, Garrett one episode, like it's pretty unprecedented to have, a cast member also be the musical guest. So you can't like not talk about them. And then, as far as, guest appearances are concerned, like I guess I could have understand or I could have justified in my mind John Belushi not being higher on the list because unfortunately he passed away a long time ago. Do younger people like know him if they haven't gone back and watched old media? I mean, Danny has done done movies for generations. He has hosted the show. It hasn't been for a while, but he did host the show. And perhaps if he hosted more than once, I think he was going to host back in the day, perhaps season 6, and then there was a strike. So have he hosted more than more than once, maybe that legacy improves, but he has guested many times as Bob Dole. I think about him being in the Timberlake Five Timers Club sketch, which was a really important moment as well. If him as the bartender, another fantastic moment that I remember that I absolutely loved in high school was during the Peyton Manning episode. We get that whole Sanjaya thing on Weekend Update where they're crying, and then they do the girl crying, and then it pans over to Dan Aykroyd crying. Like anytime Danny pops up on screen, it is a special moment. I imagine he's going to be a huge part of the 50th anniversary celebration, so I can't wait to see what he brings to the show. But yeah, between that, his political impressions, Bob Dole, Nixon, Carter, Tom Snyder as well was voted this summer when we did an impression countdown, was voted one of the top impressions in SNL history. There's just so many hits here on his resume. So was he made for SNL? No doubt. Absolutely. This guy was made for SNL. He made SNL, as far as I'm
Right. I
concerned
was
in many
gonna
ways.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I would like to
Go ahead.
shout out Ghostbusters. I would be remiss if I did not shout out Ghostbusters. Not an SNL thing, but just adds to his greatness and his glory.
Yeah, definitely. From an analytics perspective, 5.05 sketches per episode, good for 8th all time. So 5 sketches. I mean, that's a lot. Season 1, he was 3rd overall in sketch appearances. He led the cast in sketch appearances in season 2 and 3. Season 4, he was 2nd overall in sketch appearances. The big what if question for Dan Aykroyd with his legacy, besides maybe him hosting more, is what happens if he does come back for season 5? That is a huge question mark. John Belushi leaves the show. Lore has been told that Dan Aykroyd only decided a week before season 5 not to return to the show. If he is there for that 5th season and continues to dominate on the show, is he potentially the greatest cast member of all time? These are things to consider. Only 4 seasons compared to some others that will come up ahead of him. So things to think about here. Rolling Stone, back in the day, did have Dan Aykroyd at number 5, said no one else could do what he did. I have to bow down to you, Rolling Stone, here and say, we're not worthy. You are totally right here. We're too low here from the listeners on Dan Aykroyd at number 17. Will, I'm going to give you some final thoughts on Danny.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with everything that's been said. I would double down on the Ask President Carter sketch. I just think that's a really fun one and a really good use of his talents in political impression. That's just very like kind of outside of the box. But I do agree in terms of just you'd think about the show being able to last for 50 years or well 49 years. Don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but it doesn't last as long unless there's people there at the forefront that really give it that kickstart to get the eyes on it, to get the interest. There's another timeline where SNL is around for 2 seasons and it's gone because they didn't get the right people. And when you have the people like Dan Aykroyd there at the beginning to steady the ship and get out that right start, get that kickstart it takes in the future, just got to get them a little more love. Should be a little higher, a lot higher, I should say.
Victoria, final thoughts on Danny?
My final thoughts is I would like to thank him for everything he's done He made it possible for me to be at the Second City and to even dream to be on the show. So if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here.
All right. Well, you will see where I will put him at my list at the end of the show. But I think anyone who's listening knows that would be a pretty obvious answer there. Okay, one more reveal tonight. Again, another one of my favorites in SNL history, and this is somebody that we did mention earlier in the show, and I'm excited to talk about him a little bit more. So here he is at number 16 overall. This is the one, the only Jason Sudeikis here at number 16. I know a lot of you have Jason as one of your favorites as well. 9 seasons on the show, sort of, came in towards the end of his first season on the show, 2005 to 2013. 163 episodes, good for 15th all time, 671 sketches. Just to me, like absolute pure joy. And some of the stuff that he produced on the show really felt like I loved the sketches that he did here. I loved his ability to work with people like Kristen Wiig and Will Forte. And I think, when we're talking about, we mentioned him in the Will Forte segment, but comparing Danny to Jason Sudeikis for a second, I think I saw someone in the chat mention like Bill Hader is a little bit of a derivative of Dan Aykroyd, but I see a lot of Dan Aykroyd in Jason Sudeikis. I think like there is a line that you can do there as far as, being that glue that puts together a sketch properly. And I really can't imagine what the era, that third golden era looks like without a guy like Jason here at number 16. Was this the right spot for him, though? That is a big question, and we'll get into some of those moments and analytics here. Will, can I start with you first this time on what your thoughts are on Jason Sudeikis here at 16?
Yeah, so I love Sudeikis. He's one of my favorite cast members for sure. When you're looking at the list, I was really didn't know what to expect because, as mentioned in the chat, like a lot of Ted Lasso love, obviously, like in this post SNL career. So I thought that might give him a bump that some gotten for their work outside of the show. So he came in a little higher than I expected, but still, I guess, lower than he could have been given all the fanfare that he's had lately. But I feel like for my list, he was lower on my list, but he's still one of my favorite cast members. I think it's going back and rewatching some of his work. I think have even more of an appreciation for him, just because I think he really hits on a lot of the things that we talk about, like great characters. He was a great writer, obviously, did the great impressions. He's can be a leader in a support role. So I guess I'm still kind of mixed on how I feel. Like, is he too high? Is he too low? I don't know, because it's like you watch his stuff and you're like, how could this guy not be one of the best ever? But coming up after the Aykroyd conversation, like that's where you're like, all right, there should be some separation there, right? From terms of legacy and impact on the show. But really like Sudeikis. And like I said, I think he had a really great time on the show. I think we'll talk about some of my favorite moments in his sketches as well. But overall, happy that he's on the list. And I think that he's one of the templates for what I look for in a cast member is Sudeikis for sure.
Victoria, what are your thoughts on Jason Sudeikis as a cast member and here at number 16?
It's such an interesting juxtaposition of him and then Dan Aykroyd. So part of me wants to put him lower because if Dan Aykroyd's going to be 17, he needs to be way lower than that. You know what I mean? But
yeah,
on my list, him and Forte, I'd probably put somewhere closer to 20 to 25 than here. But I mean, I did say Will Forte was fairly placed. So yeah, I think at 16 is also appropriate, but I'm like, you can't be 16 if Dan Aykroyd's going to be 17. That's just not how that works. But he's great. He's fantastic. I do have a mini crush on him, but that's neither here nor there. That does have nothing to do with how I would rank him. But no, he's funny. He made an impression, and again, it's that impact of if I would show my friends SNL, I wanted to get them start watching the show, I'd show them something of Jason Sudeikis's. They've seen him outside of the show and he's done such great work that they feel a little bit warmed up to him. So it just shows to his skill and his talent.
Yeah, I think he was underappreciated as a cast member, and I do believe that his hosting stint in season 47 absolutely boosts his legacy on the list. It is one of the better alumni hosted episodes in SNL history, and the appreciation that people had to see him back at the show in
Mhm.
addition to his appreciation for being there in that monologue, was something that was remarkable to watch after going through a pretty rough stretch in the show's history from season, maybe partway through 43 all the way down to the beginning of 47. And then Sudeikis comes in there and like, again, for modern day SNL watchers who maybe didn't see all of Jason's career on the show, you can see that like we may have said this at the time in the hot take show, like it was like child's play with him. Like he was able to do things in those sketches that I was like, oh, like this is what it looks like when you have an all-time great in the building play with some of these players who, no offense to them, I don't think they were in his league. Like he had the quality that he's so well rounded in terms of being probably the one of the greatest, if not the greatest, utility player in SNL history. It's just his ability to morph into what they needed him in a sketch was so strong. Some of his moments that I absolutely loved is, just personal favorites of mine include Main Justice, which came later in his career, but that was so quotable and so much fun. I love to get to see stuff like that. Two a-holes from the beginning of his career for me, him and Kristen. I mean, we used to pretend to be the two a-holes for so many years, season after season, that we were always craving for something like that. And I'll just say a third, and then I'll let the other two panelists here talk about some of their favorite moments. But a lot of people do remember the Scared Straight sketches as like a Keenan sketch, but I think that Jason makes those sketches as the cop there, and like that one episode where he like hops up on the desk like after and sits down and just like it is like little things that you see in a Sudeikis that do remind me of Dan Aykroyd, do remind me of Phil Hartman, which are like some of the highest praises you can give to a guy that make him so well deserving of a high spot on this list. So, Will, are there some other moments that you want to bring up from Jason's career?
Yeah, those are some great ones that you just mentioned, John. I was going to echo some of those. To your point with the scared straight when he hops on the desk and the cup kind of like flies like off the desk. Love that. And I think kind of going to him as like a lead and kind of out of sketches, but like in the updates piece, I always loved him as the devil. It just felt like the best use of his talents because he's such a charming performer and like he's so likable. And then him using him in the way to be the devil and the things that he talked about and the ways that he approached it and the angles they had. There's one where he is talking about the Penn State scandal, like the week it happens, and is just like completely disgusted by the whole thing, like as the devil, and like the way that he's kind of going like to a 10 as a performer is just like I said, a really good use of him and like the way they use him as that character. And then background wise, on what's up with that, like just as Vance as I'm gonna hop in for 10 seconds and do the Cabbage Patch for and the Running Man, like as hard as I possibly can, and knowing it's a Keenan vehicle, but still giving his all to that to the point where you're like, this is as much a part of the sketch as DeAndre Cole going on and on for minutes and minutes. So those are like two of my other favorites of just the things that he was able to do as both a lead and a supporting role that I think just speak to the kind of person he was on the show and how great a performer he was as well.
Victoria, what about you? What are some other moments from Jason's career that you want to talk about?
I was gonna say we pretty much touched on all of them. Scared Straight is a phenomenal one. Potato Chip I already mentioned earlier with Will Forte. Of course, his Joe Biden, and that was something I wish he would pop in a little bit more and do if we're gonna do Joe Biden sketches or cold opens or whatever it is. I would love to have him be more part of it because I think he is, for me, he's like my one and
I
only
don't think his
Joe
Biden
Biden.
exists anymore. That's the problem.
I know. Well,
Yeah, that's fair.
that's a different podcast we can touch on later. And then of course there's Strip Club and then all his other fun stuff that he's done on Weekend Update. And then we also mentioned, of course, ESPN Classic. But yeah, I think as we're talking through this too, it shows his range of characters and he's not doing the same guy just in a different costume. So yeah, we touched on all the ones I wanted to. Also, this is a more recent one, and probably my favorite sketch of that season is parent teacher conference. So it was a great mix of steamy and
That's a good one.
funny.
Definitely. It was one of the more fun sketches we've ever talked about here on the podcast to see him and Ego
Mhm.
in that sketch together. Yeah, also got to bring up like the devil that he did, and he brought back his 668th sixth sketch in SNL history was the devil. So that's
Mhm.
Oh,
always
nice.
funny. And then, yeah, how about Mitt Romney as well? That he also did that,
Mhm.
which is also like another fun impression that he did. Legacy wise, look, I mean, he's something to think about again. Hosted once on the show, did come back a few times since he left the show. Will he come back again? I do think that will continue to boost his legacy. Like I said, I think he's more appreciated now through the hosting stint and Ted Lasso than he ever was prior to coming back to hosting. So I think there's the potential. Like if he came back next year to host, I think we would all absolutely love it. 3.96 sketches per episode, so almost 4 sketches per episode, 29th all time. That's pretty high up. Starting with season 31, because he only came in at the end of season 30, 5th in sketches, season 32, 6th, season 33, 6th, season 34, tied for 3rd, season 35, tied for 3rd, season 36, 9, season 37, 8, season 38, season 38, 5. So he never dominated necessarily in sketch appearances throughout any season, but he was always in the mix there. And like I said, I think added to the legacy of all of the sketches that he was in. Rolling Stone back in the day had Jason Sudeikis at number 25, which was interesting because he was sort of fresh off the show at the time. Interesting placement there. Said he was a sports dude who played a lot of husbands and dads, but also was able to unlock his freaky side, which I guess I could see in a way. But yeah, I mean, I sort of think that this may be the right spot for somebody like Jason. I mean, we're talking, 16 out of 180 something cast members. Like, this is a very strong spot for him here. That's well deserved. Like I said, one of my favorites, and I'm so happy he's here. So, Victoria, any final thoughts on Jason Sudeikis?
Yeah, I do wanna give an honorary mention to Ocean Billy, if anyone remembers what that is, and he it was a parody of Billy Ocean, great singer, and he goes, "Get out of my car and get into my trunk," and that's Jason Sudeikis in a nutshell.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say also one thing that I am thinking about from a legacy perspective, just in terms of why he may not have been further up the list within our fan community, which is I do remember like live watching the show at the time and him sticking around for that extra season post Kristen Wiig and really post Kristen leaving. Like I remember that moment where, Jason's not sure if he wants to leave the show. He's like super upset and he's dancing with Kristen in, her farewell that, happened during that Mick Jagger episode. And I remember seeing how sad Jason was and reading online, like how conflicted he was about coming back. And that final season on the show, people would say like he looks sort of miserable in the good nights. Does he really want to be there? And I think at the end of his career, he never got the goodbye that Bill Hader and Fred Armisen got at the end of those of that season 38. And I wonder if that sort of tainted people's view of him in a very small way to the point where he wasn't as appreciated. My hope is a lot of that has dissipated since then because Jason Sudeikis has become through Ted Lasso and again through his hosting stint, I think one of the most popular cast members in SNL history. But just something to think about. Will, what are your final thoughts on Jason?
Yeah, I think one thing that I would add is that which I think is all good commentary too from you too, John, is something I thought about Jason and I thought that I made it up and I had to look it up to make sure that it was right. And he basically said when he first came on the show, he was going through some old pictures and he found a poster of Will Ferrell and he put this picture above his desk when he first started the show. And at some point, a producer came by and was like, "Why do you, like that's kind of a high bar to hold yourself to? Like, don't want to compare yourself to Will Ferrell." And he said, "It's not because I want to be Will Ferrell. It's because everyone here that worked with Will said that he was always gave his all to every sketch he was in and was gave 100%, and he was a gentleman to everybody." And I just feel that kind of encapsulates how he approached his own career. And I think it makes sense why he's, did all the range that he brought to his characters, the way he carries himself in the show, the way he's carried himself after the show, like that approach to being on the show and that appreciation and wanting to give your all, I think is what I think everyone wants in all the cast members. But I think Jason really, was the epitome of that.
100%. Great final note here for Jason Sudeikis at number 16. So excited that we got to talk about him. Wish it could have been a little bit further down the road, but I do understand. Like I said, three of my favorite cast members in SNL history tonight. What a lineup we got to talk about tonight between Will Forte, Dan Aykroyd, and Jason Sudeikis. But we still got one more segment to do on the show. And we went from the listeners' list, and now we're going to head over to my list and where I place them on my list. So we'll compare one to the other here from the voting. So very excited to get Will and Victoria's thoughts on my list here as I bring it up on screen. So here we go. We got the cast rankings on the left, my rankings on the right. I'm hoping that this is a better way to view the list this time so you can see them very clearly. So on the left, we have exactly what the listeners voted as we have revealed them. I will read my list here and talk about where I placed each of these cast members. So from 35 all the way to 1, we have David Spade, then Martin Short, Bowen Yang, Tracy Morgan, Ego Wodum, Chevy Chase, Mikey Day, Sherry O'Terry, Joe Piscopo, Tim Meadows. Then Adam Sandler, Seth Meyers, Jimmy Fallon, Taron Killam, Norm Macdonald, Vanessa Bayer, Anna Gasteyer, Rachel Dratch, Kevin Nealon, Chris Parnell. My top 15 so far: Bobby Moynihan, Beck Bennett, Aidy Bryant, Molly Shannon, Andy Samberg, and I have Will Forte at 10 here. I know that's surprising for a lot of people, but I did a lot of like this versus that today. And I was like, I don't know that I can argue that Will Forte has, is a greater cast member than some of the people above him. I don't know. I'm still thinking about it. I love him so much, but that I have him at 10 right now. May move him up. Jane Curtin at 9. Sean Lovitz at 8. Mike Myers I have here at 7. I decided between, in this past week to flip Daryl Hammond and Mike Myers. I just think that Daryl's overall contribution to the show is probably a little bit greater than Mike's. Jason Sudeikis here is at number 5. I do think that we're starting to head into another tier, followed by John Belushi, Jen Hooks, Bill Murray, and then Dan Aykroyd is my new number 1. We have a new number 1 on my rankings so far here. To me, he is the greatest cast member of all time so far, as revealed. Victoria, I saw you shaking your head. So do you disagree, or are you ready to rip me apart? What do you think?
I'm speechless.
What did I do?
You don't have 2 of who I would put in my top 10 on your list.
All right. Who is that?
Hold on. Well, I don't have my glasses either, and they're getting shipped to me next week.
Okay, so you want me to go to Will first?
Yeah, go to Will, because I need to make sure I'm seeing this right.
Will, what do you think of my placement of Danny and Jason and Will on the list so far?
Yeah, so I definitely agree with Dan with Aykroyd. I think being number 1, I do think that he is the number 1. I think on this list. So I think about that. Sudeikis, I definitely think Sudeikis should be in the top 10. I am surprised he came in number 5 for you. But I do like how much farther up the list Daryl Hammond is on yours than the fan rankings. I think that he just brought so much to the show. Will Forte in the top 10. John, I'm gonna let you have that one. I'm gonna let you have that one. I would say he's probably lower on my list, but I think at this point too, you're still separating some of the greats from some of the greats. So I'll let you have that. And I think just for the sake of continuity, I want to give you a hard time about having Martin Short the second to last. I think he should be higher on this list, but I just want to make sure we keep the streak going of giving you a hard time on that one. So
I moved him up one spot already. I don't know if I could do it again. But before I go to Victoria, Will, you said that you think Will Forte should be a little bit lower. Are there a couple people behind him that you would have put above Will Forte? Like that you can see noticeably?
Yeah, it's funny. Like I'm looking at it, and I really, to your point, I really can't. There's no one that I can say like 100% absolutely should be higher than Will Forte. So like I said, I think I would be arguing with you for the sake of arguing. And I think as the list rounds out, as we obviously have more people to go, I don't think Will probably end the list. Well, he might be moved to number 1 by the time we're done with this. Who knows for you, John? But I think he's probably going to be in the range that I think makes sense for him. But yeah, looking at this closely, there's not a lot of people that I could say definitively should be above Will Forte. Although I do, there are some people that are my personal favorites that I don't think I could put over.
Oh, favorite list, Forte will be at the top for me for sure, but I have to be fair and objective as I give my greatest of all time list. Victoria, sure. Where you got your thoughts together?
No, but I will answer anyway. So let me confirm. This 1 through 35 that you've got, that is your top 35, and there are
Yeah, so I'm slotting these in week by week as we reveal them, playing a little this
okay.
or that, and being like, okay, Dan Aykroyd or Bill Murray. All right, I'm gonna put Danny, like,
Mm,
as we're going. So this is where I feel that,
okay.
and the list is fluid. We can move
Yep.
people up or down depending on people's arguments, but this is how I feel just off the
Okay.
bat with my initial thoughts.
I I mean, I respect your top 10.
Okay.
It's not wrong per se. I just would have Chris Farley in my top 10,
Well,
and I
he
would
hasn't been
have
revealed yet.
oh.
Yeah, we'll
Oh,
see.
I
No, these are
see.
yeah.
Oh, all of who's been revealed so far.
Okay.
Got it.
Yeah, these are only cast members who have been revealed so far. So I
Okay.
understand why you're so discombobulated because
Why do you
Oh my
hate Will
no.
god.
Ferrell and Eddie Murphy, John?
Yeah.
Just kidding.
We'll see if they come up on the list at some point.
We'll
But
see.
for
We'll see. I don't want
now,
to get ahead of myself. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Who knows?
Well,
yes.
who's to say those folks will even be revealed? We don't know what the people want. But
Yes.
okay, in that case, fine. I'll accept. I'll
All right.
accept this as
I won
is.
this one. Just remember I won this one.
Oh god, I was sweating. I don't even know what I looked like in the camera with how far close I was to it.
Now I understand why
Um,
you were so discombobulated. Yes, there are 15 more names we have not talked about yet
okay.
on the list. So they will be slotted in as we reveal them week to week.
Lord
So,
Jesus. Well, yeah,
all right.
I do respect that you have Jimmy Fallon at number 23. I wouldn't have expected that from you. Like he's further way
Yeah,
further up than
I think he's. Anyways, we don't have to open up this can of worms again. But I
right.
do think he's given a hard time for his time on the show. But anyways,
Yeah.
all right. Well, that is my list. 1 through 35 on the right. We got 16 all the way to 50 on the left. And next week we got 3 more cast members to reveal: 15, 14, and 13. And just a programming note, we will be revealing those 3 cast members on Tuesday night of next week. So only 5 days from now, because of Thanksgiving, we're going to move that show over to Tuesday. So you get a lot of the SNN day by day here. We're going to have the roundtable on Monday. Then we got their cast rankings reveal on Tuesday, and By the Numbers will stick on Wednesday of next week. So that is our show for tonight. So excited to get to talk to Victoria and Will about these 3 incredible cast members in SNL history. Victoria, thank you for joining us. Where can the listeners check out everything you got going on?
You can find me on Instagram here, or you can find me at the Second City this Monday for my finale show that I'm doing. It's a great sketch show. Think of it as Saturday Night Live, but on a stage on the one of the main theaters at Second City, Chicago. So if you want to come, are interested in coming, please let me know. I can try to get you a ticket or something like that. If not, then you can find me at the IO Theater in Chicago starting in January on Wednesday nights. Please watch By the Numbers and then come to the show out of respect. But yeah, I'm doing a lot of random things that I hope to be revealing more in the future. But if not, you can find me here on this network whenever John wants me to be here. He is
Absolutely. Will, where can the listeners check you out?
You can check me out on the Saturday Night Network's SNL's Greatest Cast Members episode, 16 through 18. Just kidding. But also I hop on with our friend Thomasina over at the SNL Hall of Fame. So I just recently did an episode about Daryl Hammond. So I think that was released last week. So I'm on that one and then popping up on here whenever John gives me the invite.
Absolutely. Yeah, you were fantastic on that episode, Will. So I got to just give you props for that one. So yeah, we have next up, we're going to have our hot take show right after Jason Momoa and Tate McRae. We had some fun promos that came out this week. So excited to talk about that. Then we got our roundtable. We got the numbers reveal and By the Numbers next week before Thanksgiving. We also have our SNL sketch breakdown show that I will be recording with Victoria right after this, just for patrons. So if you want to check out that show, that's available on Patreon, patreon.com/the SNL Network. That will come out tonight at some point. And I also want to mention before we leave tonight, Dana Carvey's family suffered an absolute tragedy tonight or last night, whenever I'm not sure the timeline, but I just want to say our thoughts are with Dana and the entire family on the loss of Dana's son. Not that I have a personal relationship, and it's always never sure exactly what to say in these moments, but just I know we all love Dana Carvey, and we love Dana Carvey as a cast member on the show and getting to listen to him on Fly on the Wall, and I just feel for his family tonight. So just wanted to say all of that before we head out tonight. On behalf of Victoria and Will, my name is John Schneider from the SNN. We will see you next time, everybody. Have a good one.